Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of Farming for the Future with AgriBioSystems. Today we have several guests on the show. Dave Swain is back. We have Brad Meyer with My Ag Data as well as Chad Greenlee for My Ag Data. And in today's podcast, we're not going to be talking about agronomy. We're not going to be talking about soil health, which is much different from what you are used to from us, but it is about education and it's about profit. And I was introduced to Brad Meyer by Dave Swain here just a couple of weeks ago. And what they have to offer in terms of less time, more money, more efficiency in terms of planting acreage reporting and harvest acreage reporting, it absolutely blew my mind. And so I'm going to turn this over to Brad Meyer, and Chad Greenlee will probably chime in here from time to time. But Brad, everybody else, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Brad. I'm really happy to be on the show and present information to farmers about streamlining the acreage report and production report. And, I hope everybody finds it beneficial and can take some important pieces of information out. Chad, do you want to kind of introduce yourself?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Brad. Good to see you again too, and thanks for letting us join today. Chad Greenlee here. I live in Oklahoma. Um, Known Brad from a long time back there, and have also known My Data for over the years since the initiation of the company, and was able to join them a year ago this month. And I got to say that what My Data is doing to help farmers with reporting is such a great thing. I've got such a passion for that, and it's been really great to be over here with the group, and looking forward to today's conversation.
Excellent. Excellent. Dave, anything you'd like to add before we start picking Brad and Chad's brain?
No, we better spend the time on that. They already, if they've listened to the prior podcast, they already know who I am, and so I don't need to do an introduction. I don't want to take up their time. So
Okay.
let's jump in.
Excellent. Okay. Well, Brad, I'm going to turn it over to you. Let's get in depth here on what My Ag Data does and how it makes farmers more efficient, saves them time, and ultimately makes them more money.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. So just going to go over streamlining that acreage report and production report. And I figured, kind of a good starting point is just a little bit of kind of history of My Ag Data, kind of where it came from and why. So back in 2012, there was some language drafted in a farm bill called Accuracy, and Accuracy was designed to make farmers' lives easier by reporting one report to both FSA and RMA, so crop insurance. And it has taken a long time. 2014 is when that language was actually finalized in that farm bill. And My Ag Data has been working to push towards accuracy and that completion of accuracy. We did 6 different pilots with both FSA and RMA to streamline that approach, streamline that reporting. We actually helped to build the USDA clearinghouse that can make it for that data to actually come through and transfer from one agency to the other agency. And the last pilot that we did was back in Nebraska, and it was just using purely geospatial information being captured from climate field view and then transmitting that over to the FSA. And through that pilot, they realized there were some gaps that they needed to complete before finalizing it. So in 2023, we got word from the FSA that this was finally going to happen. And we started advertising and promoting the ability for farmers to report digitally in the digital age. And we have fine-tuned that to make it a little bit easier. And right now we're sitting at a really good place. There has been memos sent from the national FSA down to the state and county offices. That memo was CP 777, which highlighted the ability for county offices to be able to accept that information. So now we're sitting here and, the start of planning 25, where you can now take the information directly from your planter and use it for the report. So that's a little bit of a history lesson of my ag data, what we've been working towards to make everybody's life easier. You know, right now it's basically farmer goes to the FSA office, fill out the paper maps, send it over to their technician, and it's basically sitting down with the technician for an hour or two doing data entry. And really, in today's world, that could be a much better conversation with the technician, you know, talking about farm benefits and farm programs as opposed to data entry. So really, it's taking those paper maps and digitizing it. That at the highest level is what we're doing to make everybody's life easier. Now, there's a little bit of more information that goes along with that and why it's a benefit other than just it's convenient. And I'll get into that in a little bit here. But Brad, Dave, anything you kind of want to add up to this point?
I think one of the biggest things, at least early on in discussion here, is the time savings and the ease. And I mean, let's also face it, you know, we as humans, we tend to gravitate to ease. And something like this can just make a big difference. And, you know, farmers are so busy managing the entire farm and doing everything that they have to do on a daily basis that this is something that's going to change the game for them.
I think so. I think so. And we all know everybody hates to do paperwork. I think that's the big thing, right? Now, when we're
I'll
talking
agree with
about
that.
yeah, right? Like who wants to sit and have an office day where you're filling out stacks of paper maps, right? Especially when we've got technology that can capture information at a basically sub-inch level, right? So I want to talk a little bit about what a common land unit is, or a CLU, because that is a very important piece of this whole equation. So I would say maybe 20 or 30 years ago, the push was made by the USDA to digitize farm boundaries, right? And I think it's a really interesting question to pose, to be like, what is a field? Because that answer could be different depending on who you're talking to, whether it's an adjuster, whether it's an agronomist, whether it's a farmer or a landlord, right? That's all going to mean something different to somebody. So they tried to kind of standardize it to say this parcel of land is a field, and above that is a tract, and above that is a farm serial number. So that's kind of the idea of the common land unit. So the FSA drew these CLUs 20 or 30 years ago using imaging that can get down to a certain level, 33 meters, for instance. And, you know, you can only get down so far. So, you know, the technicians back then drew all these common land units, and, you know, there it is. Those are the farms for each producer. So if you get a pack, you know, a stack of paper maps from FSA, they'll have lines drawn on them that indicate this is their field, right? Now, I was an adjuster for a long time, 15 years or so, and I can't tell you how many times I would be talking with a producer and they'd be like, oh, this, you know, home farm is, let's say 93 acres, but FSA calls it 100, right? You have those conversations all the time. Well, a lot of times a farmer cannot put down the acres that they planted on that common land unit because FSA won't accept it. Well, we have the ability now to show where that line is planted within the common land unit, but also fill in some additional information to make that usable. And now you as a farmer can actually take the information from your planter and show this is actually where I've planted it. This is where it is within the CLU. Allocate the correct acres within each piece of it. And I think that's the big piece for those technicians, right? And a lot of times when those CLUs were drawn, they were kind of drawn a little bit bigger just because of limitations, you know, not being able to get down to a certain resolution. You know, if you have an iPhone or an Android, you know, you can take your Google map or your iMap and go all the way down to, let's say, 9 feet. So you can really see the difference between, okay, here's where the field starts and here's where the tree line starts. So just kind of incorporating all of those things to make it easier to show this is what's actually planted, and then this is the common land unit. So that is the big differentiator now, is being able to layer in multiple pieces of data for that report. So that's a little bit of kind of what those common land units look like. You know, there's some additional information that goes along with it, but that's the standard form of measurement that is used both by FSA and for crop insurance. And I would argue that most farmers don't know what, you know, the home farm is in terms of the farm serial number, the tract, the field ID. You know, it's just a bunch of numbers for most people.
Well, if you look at the digital age today, it's also a very outdated system, and there's always reasons to change. There's always reasons to improve, and that's something that you folks have been able to do, and it's going to make some big changes for guys or growers, without a doubt.
And if I
Absolutely.
can jump in here too, and we think about all of the things that have happened over the years, you know, we talk about the technology and being able to do things better than we have been before. You know, Brad, you planted years ago, and you know, think about all of the guest rows and all of the point rows and how everything used to be. You know, you were judged on how you farmed by how straight your rows were, right? You know, and if heaven forbid you had a bad day and that field was always right next to the road where all your neighbors could see it. Well, that's kind of the same thing we are here. We got steering, and so now we do a better job. The spacing is better. All of the things are better in how we plant and take advantage of our fields, like Brad Meyer was just talking about. Same thing now can apply to your reporting, because we've done a good job and now we can do a better job. And I think that's one of the things that we have to look at in using these tools. We do a good job. Now we have tools that we can do it better.
It's always about improving, right? Now, here's an example of kind of what I mean about the CLUs being overdrawn or kind of a little bit larger than the planted area. So in this example here, we've got the common land unit was calculated as 42.5 acres. The planted acres are 36.6. So that equates to a 13.7% difference between what would have been reported previously compared to being able to report down to what you've actually planted. So on the image that I've got here, you can see there's green part of the planted, that would be soybeans, yellow is corn, and then the pink area, those are idle acres. So the idle acres is the important thing here, is because those are the acres that you would no longer pay premium on for crop insurance. And the other important thing about those idle acres is when you're harvesting your field, you know, in the fall, those idle acres are basically taking your production, getting diluted into. So when you talk about your actual production history that is part of your guarantee, if you're diluting your bushels into those idle acres, it's bringing it down and not reflecting truly what you're planting and what you're harvesting. So it's really important to get this better representation, this better level of reporting, because it's going to make everything better for you in the long run, right? Like your premium for the next year is going to be cheaper. Your APH over the next several years is going to increase dramatically. And we have seen examples of that many, many times. And I can talk a little bit about that in a little bit, but at the high level, that's what it's about. It's just reporting accurately what you're planting and where.
So basically, what you're saying is growers are getting hit twice with this. In most cases, by having to pay crop insurance premiums on more acres than what's actually being farmed. And it's also lowering the APH because those acres are included, but they're not actively being farmed. And so we are getting a double whammy here.
Absolutely. That is exactly one of the issues. And, you know, I think that idea of the common land unit and that kind of standard approach, I mean, it makes sense to me why that was incorporated, why it's used, you know, because you have to have some sort of standard in order to do this. So I think it's a good starting place. But now it's about kind of taking that and enhancing it, improving upon it. I don't think that there's a need to just completely get rid of that, but also just, like I said, enhance it. Use it to kind of fill up the information from the planter for that report. But you're absolutely right. It's you're getting hit with the premium on those extra acres, and you're diluting your yield in the process. So what we have heard over the years from growers that have been working directly with us is obviously the saving of time. It's convenient, right? Taking real information from your planner, funneling it into the report, and then being able to transmit that electronically or digitally. The other important thing that I've heard is, and I'm going to relate this to some experiences that I've had in the past. I had mentioned earlier that I crop insurance adjuster, and I would physically be in a field of corn, but it would be listed as soybeans on the crop insurance policy and also at the FSA. Well, with this, you're going to get a much more accurate report because you're bringing in real information from equipment. You're standardizing that. You're having one report that goes to FSA, one report that goes to RMA. You won't have those instances of things getting miskeyed or misrepresented because you're using better information to start with. So you really don't have to worry about those kind of instances. So those are kind of just the two high level, you know, grower benefits. But the other important thing that we've heard from growers is obviously the monetary piece of it. Saving money on your crop insurance is huge, right? Especially in today's ag economy where we're dealing with input costs that are high, tariffs, commodity prices low. You know, it's about controlling some of those margins. And I think if you can at least control that piece, that's a huge benefit for you. And I think personally, this is the most important one for me, is just the ability to increase your APH. Even just from a guarantee perspective, you're protecting your risk, right? The other side of that is with a higher guarantee, higher APH, you can lend or borrow more money, right? That's the other important piece. I've talked to banks about that, and that's kind of how they're viewing some of the lending kind of going forward for the next couple of years, just because they've got to control their risk as well too. So being able to push that APH higher, increase that borrowing power for a grower, I think is so important right now. Now,
I think another thing that I'm going to jump back on the time savings. I mean, the range of time that I've heard of growers spending in the FSA office to do their reporting. You know, your example shows here at 1,500 acre grower reducing the reporting time by more than 12 hours. You know, think about how much time you spend in the FSA office going through all of those fields. And like you mentioned, there's still mistakes made, and we're all human. That's not the issue here. But think about what the FSA people really ought to be focusing on, and that's helping you look for programs for your operation, what fits you best. But they get caught up in the admin of doing reporting. And so they never, don't probably know the programs as well as they could because they're spending so much time on the admin, let alone then educating the farmer to those programs and have the opportunities. I mean, if you want to go in and have coffee with your FSA people, have at it. I mean, they're great people. I go into our office on a semi-regular basis. Great people. I have no issue with that. But let's do it with a better purpose and a better intention. And that's to better the operation, not just do admin work. Again, back to the paperwork.
that's a great point, Dave. And, you know, I think it is about having more meaningful conversations. Absolutely. Brad, I think you were going to jump in right before Dave.
Yeah, there's importance of having more meaningful conversations. There's importance of becoming more efficient. But I mean, just these 4 benefits here alone, again, is a huge positive to the grower, but the entire industry as well. I mean, you're talking about saving time, saving money, reducing audit risk, and increasing your APH. Those are things that, I mean, from any farmer, I don't know that anyone could ever argue with that.
Absolutely. I mean, it hits everybody, right? And I think the time piece of it is, it's kind of interesting because it's all relative. Most farmers don't value their time, especially like they should.
Mhm.
I've talked to farmers and they'd be like, well, I spend 2 hours at the FSA, so it's not that big of a deal, right? But they are not taking into account, okay, well, that's 2 hours at the actual FSA. How long did it take you to drive there? How long did it take you to fill out your paper maps? Just the prep work that goes into just that 2-hour meeting, you still have to take all of that into consideration. Okay, well, what happens if you miss something or forgot something? Adding that into the time equation as well too. Fixing some mistakes, reviewing the information after it's been kind of completed. It's all part of that process. So, and I think that the 12 hours is probably a little conservative at times, but it all depends on the producer, the size, the amount of common land units, the farm tracts that they've got, because that is all represented in all of those different paper maps. And then how much time are they spending doing the same thing with crop insurance as well too, with their agent?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
So one thing that we started when My Ag Data was first founded back in 2012, it was designed to be the TurboTax of acreage reporting. Self-reporting, kind of signing up, registering, completing those reports as is. What we have found is, yes, we're the TurboTax of acreage reporting, but we're also, I would kind of argue, the H&R Block of acreage reporting. Having the ability for somebody to do those reports for you instead of you doing the reports. So we kind of take that burden on. We do the paperwork for you, basically. So when we did this about 4 years ago now, we had about 23 growers that enrolled in our managed services. We took care of the reports for them, both acreage reporting and production reporting. And those 23 growers were located across 7 different states. And we helped save those 23 growers almost $115,000. And the reason for that is because the difference between the common land units and the actual planted acres that were reported was about 5.2% difference, which I think is pretty significant. And as we have enrolled new growers into our managed services, as we're doing this analysis across kind of a broader area, we're now starting to see that actually tick up. So it's now actually ticking closer to 6. Now I know, Brad, you thought this was pretty interesting when I was showing it to you.
Oh, absolutely. Which, from the background in the agronomy world and constantly adjusting field boundaries, the difference, knowing there was a difference, wasn't a surprise. It was the amount of that difference of 5+%. That was really eye-opening to me. And you look here at 23 growers, 7 states, a total savings in a single year of nearly $115,000, and that is money that can be recouped by simply having greater efficiency and doing things via technology and literally stepping into the world we're in today. Instead of, well, we've always done it this way.
And the monetary piece of that's just the savings on the crop insurance for the producer, right? Mm-hmm. There's also this additional savings that, crop insurance is subsidized because it's a federal program. So there's savings there as well too. That's not even reflected here. And then additionally, think about how much time you spend in actually doing all those pieces that I talked about a little bit earlier ago. That's not reflected in this as well too. So you start to add up a lot of these pieces, and this is a huge benefit, not just for farmers, not just for FSA or crop insurance agents. I mean, us as U.S. taxpayers, this should be important to everybody.
Think something else for those that are only able to listen to this and not see it. Those 23 growers were not just in I states. Everybody wants to think, oh, well, you did that just in the I states. That doesn't apply. Your geography was very diverse in these 23 states. And so understand and think about it in this manner. If you're in an I state, the perception, I should say, of an I state, it's flat and square. Trust me, it's not, but that's neither here nor there. The accuracy of that is probably better in the CLUs in comparison because they're straight lines. When you start getting into odd shaped fields, those deviations will get a lot bigger as it moves forward. So your savings and everything become a lot more impactful.
That's absolutely correct. And
Yep.
even the example, oh, sorry, Brad, go ahead.
Just wanted to let everybody know that this will also be put on the AgriBiosystems YouTube page. And so for those that actually want to watch the video side of it too, you will also have that option. So sorry for interrupting there, but want to make sure that everybody knew that.
Thank you so much. No problem. So, Dave, you made a really good point about, the square fields and the, I states and, kind of that Midwest mindset. This is not just one solution for one piece of the country. It's for the whole country. If you farm, you can take advantage of this. And even those square fields that you have, or you might think that there's not that much of a difference, if you got a telephone pole running through it, or pipelines that come in, all those little pieces start to kind of add up. There's trees that might be in the middle of the field that aren't being taken care of or removed from the common land unit, but you're farming around it. So it's all those little pieces that start to add up across the whole farming operation. And it's, the devil's in the details, and being able to kind of remove some of those pieces. Now, I talked a little bit earlier about the actual production history. So APH, and what the APH is a database of your production that you've harvested over at least 4 years, but up to 10, right? Most of the time, common land units using as the standard kind of reporting mechanism, and then taking those bushels that you harvested and apply it to that to create a bushel per acre. So the example I have here on the screen, and for those that can't see it, it's basically, it starts out in 2015 and goes to 2024, producer that we've worked with for over 10 years now. And I've got 2 lines that are graphed out. The first line is a blue line that represents the production that is applied to the common land units. And over a 10-year period of time, that producer would be sitting with 139.9 bushels to the acre. Again, that's just taking the production as is and applying it to the common land unit, dividing it out to come up with that. I've got another line, which is green line, which is taking that same production, but applying it now to a smaller shape, which is the planted shape. And, kind of year 1, year 2, you don't see that much of a difference, right? Year 1, 118 for the CLU, 119 for the planted shape. But you start to go out 10 years and you're sitting at 158.8 bushels to the acre when you're applying it to the planted shape compared to 139.9. So that's almost 20 bushel difference between those two. So when you actually get out 4 or 5 years into this whole process, it starts to compound pretty quickly. And that, I think, is the most important piece of all of this.
So Brad, what's actually causing this? Because if you look at 2015, the numbers are pretty close. I mean, they're within a bushel, but as you get 10 years out, you are 20 bushel apart. What's the discrepancy here? What's going on here that's causing that?
It's taking that average, right, and dividing it out. And if you're kind of doing this kind of static approach to applying that production, year in, year and out, you're diluting it. And that's the big thing, is you are diluting your APH. So when you're actually getting further out, you're getting a better representation of what truly is being harvested at that field. You're dropping off those bad years, right? You're getting to a better view of what you're actually planting and you're actually harvesting. Because in the past, let's say you were to go from 2005 to 2015, again, you're taking that common land unit and applying it to your production, right? So that's why there's not that much of a difference, right? Because you're kind of using the same version of the story, right? As you get further out, you're getting that better representation. So you're getting those kind of previous years and it's dropping off.
Perfect.
You're no longer getting that dilution.
Perfect. And that's great explanation. But that's something that I wanted to make sure that we clarified here, especially for whether you're watching the video or not. As you go through time and more years, you are going to see that separation become larger and larger.
Same thing with soybeans, same thing with whether you're planting peanuts or cotton or potatoes, wheat, sugar beets, dry beans. It doesn't really matter. It doesn't matter the crop. It's the same concept. And it's just because, again, end of the day, common land units are bigger, planted shape is smaller. And of all the years I've been doing this for almost 7 years now, working directly with my ag data, I have never seen a producer's fields planted be larger than their common land units. We've talked a lot about kind of the history, about kind of where we're at. A lot of this is coming from, my words, but we have worked with lots of growers over the years. And I always think it's important to understand kind of the farmer's view of my ag data. And I've got 4 people that I've kind of highlighted here. I've got John Strickland, who's in Georgia. He has constantly told me how much his life has improved because of my ag data, because we're improving that reporting process. He used to spend weeks filling out his paper maps. And now he spends an hour with me on the phone, going through, making sure it's right, and then we get it shipped off to where it needs to go. Got a farm manager up in Minnesota that spent 3 weeks just getting his FSA stuff taken care of, and then he'd spend a whole nother week trying to get his crop insurance taken care of. And again, hopping on a call with me, taking care of it, hour, done. So I mean, that's a huge time savings for him. Eric West up in Michigan started using this last year, using his climate field view data, and he just highlighted how much easier it was for him to be able to do this, and it increased his accuracy, which he loved. And then finally, I've got an organic grower up in Michigan that for him it was about the peace of mind, and I think that's important as well too. Making sure that everything is correct, making sure that he's not, kind of planting outside of his CLUs and reporting something, and, making sure that it's not planted in wetlands and then triggering some sort of audit or, compliance review, or, kind of getting himself into trouble by mistake, right? I think that peace of mind, there's a lot of value to that. Now, when we talk about machine data or precision ag, what have you, it's, kind of technology that is captured by using GPS. We bring in data from John Deere, Climate Field View, Case, Topcon, Ag Leader, all those companies. We're able to do a cloud connection, bring in the data. We can process some information manually if you don't have the, kind of cloud connection that some people have. So we can bring in this information for the planting report, for the production report. We actually, with TopCon, we actually worked on a special project where they own the Digistar grain cart brand, and we actually helped get the loss adjustment manual changed and updated to accept electronic grain cart records as a standalone record for claims. And I've talked to a lot of adjusters, I've talked to a lot of farmers, I've talked to a lot of agents. Everybody appreciates that new feature. Think about how much easier this is, layering in acreage reporting and production reporting and the grain cart records, all of those pieces. So there's a lot of value across that whole reporting process.
A lot of value just through the time saved.
So let me ask you a question. You've got a grower that's out there that is using all of the tools that are on their tractor combine, but they're not doing the wireless data transfer.
Mm-hmm.
So they have that data, it's on their terminals. How would they go about using this?
Yeah, so if you've got, so Dave, are you asking like if they don't have a cloud connection, for instance, or kind of like My John Deere or
Correct.
Climate
Yes.
Friendly? Okay, right. So the nice thing about what we're doing within My Data is we're basically kind of creating that environment for you to take your data, upload, and then see it on a map, right? So you could take your, USB drive, put it into the monitor, take your files off the monitor, upload it into the computer, and then dump them in, and we'll take it, process it, and stitch it, all those fields, and put it on a map for you. And many times what we're having to do is kind of clean up that information. The thing about precision ag data is it's not always just clean out the gate, right? There's usually some things that need to be done to it, kind of fix it, update it. And that's where we come in and really help growers be able to use their data. I would say that most growers do not have perfect, pristine data that can be used directly for reporting right out the gate, like being able to push a button onto the monitor and then have it go directly to FSA. Very few people are like that, because we live in a real world, right? There's so many things that can change, that can happen. I mean, it's like you're in the heat of the battle, right? Monitor goes out. Well, I'm not going to try to monkey with the monitor to kind of get it back in. I'm trying to plant, and I'm trying to get this thing going and finish up.
Rain's coming.
Rain's coming. I got my kid's baseball game. I've got, whatever, you got things that you have to do. I'm not going to try to fix this on the fly. And that's where we come in and we take the data and we fix it. I've seen examples of, you got a field where you got this hole in the center of it. And a lot of people, I've heard this time and time again, good data in, good data out, bad data in, bad data out, right? Nobody ever talks about, well, why is there bad data? And that's where we've kind of drilled in to understand, okay, this is why the data might be incomplete, or why it might be messed up, or something is just not quite right about it. That producer was like, oh yeah, my seed dealer is actually planting a test plot there, and that's why that hole represents, that's why there's a hole there. Well, okay, well, let's use another piece of information. Maybe there's some spray records that we can use. Maybe there's a previous year's data that we can kind of tap into to kind of leverage to kind of fill in that missing information. I'll tell you a really interesting story that I just learned yesterday. There is on the sprayers, for instance, there is GPS coordinates that are captured, and in that coordinate, it's there can be an offset that is included in the monitor, the XY coordinate. if you don't know that if your monitor is sitting to the right of you within, a foot or two, you have to account for that through that XY coordinate offset. And that's not something that just people would think about. I didn't even know about it until just yesterday. So it's just kind of a taking in some of these things and accounting for it to, increase the accuracy. Just that little offset being off a foot and a half, 2 feet, that's the difference between putting your line directly at the field where it needs to be, or it could be 4 feet into the woods.
Interesting. So in Dave's question, if a grower doesn't have the ability to have things uploaded through My John Deere, Climate, etc., will you also need the shape files of the field boundaries prior to getting that data?
So what we do with our managed services is not shape files in terms of the, field boundaries, from, like, I would call it an operational boundary, your kind of buckets of information. What we actually do is we work with the grower to actually get their common land unit from their FSA office.
Okay.
So we have a common land unit release form, for people that sign up with us. So we go and actually get their common land units, and we use that as kind of the operational boundary to fill the buckets of information in with.
Okay.
And then we're layering that in with the actual planning data. That's a great question.
I think something else that you were talking about with the offset, for the listeners, probably as much as anything, we talk about that in context of the reporting, but when you look at how that affects your operation as a whole, that shows you the importance of working with your equipment dealer, your technology dealer, whoever you're working with in your operation to run the planter, the combine, anything you're doing. Becomes very important. It may not have that, we can get the operational data, even if it's out in the, the one field boundary line is over in the woods. As a whole, it's going to be the same acreage. But when you look at the accuracy of how you're running your equipment, that has some long-term effects that you want to make sure you address fairly quickly. So my recommendation is to make sure you talk with your technology people and make sure everything is calibrated before the season starts. Even calibrating, learn how to calibrate it so you can do it inside the season as well.
Absolutely. It's all about having better data management practices. And I know that's not easy for some people. They might not have a technology person that they can kind of lean on to get answers for, but it is about at least understanding kind of high level what some of these things are doing. And I'm going to pick on John Deere. I do love John Deere, but I'm going to pick on them just for a moment. If you look at kind of the area of a field and the calculations that are being captured, for instance, in My John Deere, you can see that there is an area seeded within that where it's calculating, okay, here's how many acres were seeded by the equipment, which is great. That's fantastic. The interesting thing about that, though, is what the planter is doing is calculating area worked, not necessarily area seeded. And there's a difference between those two. If you've got overlapping that's occurring, which you're always going to have some level of overlap, it's a part of farming. You're just going to have that to happen. And what John Deere is interested in at that point is the performance of the machinery, right? Understanding where that equipment is actually passing over that piece of land, whether it's a unique piece or whether it's over the same piece of dirt. It's still capturing all of those acres. You can almost think of it as duplicating it, right? So what we do within the Meyer data system is we're actually taking all of those pieces of information and creating a shape from that, and then calculating the actual area of the shape. So in the example that I've got, we've got 84.3 acres that are displaying in John Deere. But when we bring it into the Meyer data system, we're actually calculating at 83.6 acres. So 7/10 of an acre on this farm. And you're probably thinking to yourself, so what? You know, is it that big of a deal? No, not for one farm. But you start multiplying that by how many farms you've got kind of in your operation. You know, maybe that overlap's a little bit more extreme, but 7/10 of an acre multiplied by, 100 farms. That's a little bit more information, right? That's a little more acres that you're paying for on your crop insurance premium. So some of it is just kind of in these little nuances that you wouldn't even think about. And I think most people probably don't think about, but we're a little bit of data nerds over here at My Ag Data and kind of figuring out some of these things. And I always think it's fascinating. And again, it's about accounting for different practices, whether it's an irrigated pivot, whether it is, NFSC versus FAC. You have to account for all of those details within the report. So we're able to bring in different pivot layers for people. A lot of times what I've seen within kind of the FSA style pivots is they'll draw from the center pivot to the end gun, but they're not taking into account the 20, 30, 40 feet that are being shot off the end gun. So accounting for that to really show, okay, this is truly what's irrigated. So again, it's just all about those little nuances that go into the report to make it as accurate as possible. So we've talked a lot about acreage reporting, and I'd love to talk about production reporting with you, Brad, for just a moment, if that's okay.
Yeah, absolutely.
So we work with a lot of growers in Nebraska, and the reason for that is because they need to separate out the production at that practice level, right? Mm-hmm. So taking the production off of the irrigated land versus the dry land, and the reason for that is because in crop insurance, there's an enterprise by practice. So it's two separate guarantees based off of those practices. So we've seen a lot of people come in from Nebraska trying to, take advantage of this because they struggle trying to figure out, okay, here's how many bushels I've got in that irrigation layer. Here's the bushels that I've got from the dry land. So we're actually taking into all those things and being able to split those bushels out right at that practice level. But if you think about, let's say, combining and harvesting and the data that's associated with that, within John Deere or Case or FieldView, doesn't really matter who you are, they're going to calculate those things all differently. The acres harvested, are they applying it based off of what's harvested, the shape of the harvest? Or are they going to take those bushel to the acre based off of what was originally planted? Are they going to take the shrink factors into consideration? What's the wet bushels compared to the dry bushels? And what I think is interesting about that is if you have a claim, an adjuster is working through the claim, and I'll just use a settlement sheet as an example of that. They'll take the wet bushels from the settlement sheet, and they'll take a moisture percentage, and they'll use a factor from the risk management agency to calculate that, and then they'll take those wet bushels and dry it down. So that shrink factor. Now, every single company, whether it's a grain elevator, whether it is an equipment manufacturer, whatever, they're all going to use a different rate of shrink to take those wet bushels and dry it down. We have taken a different approach. If we are using this information for acreage reporting and production reporting is going to be used for crop insurance, well, we use the same standard shrink factors that an adjuster would use during claim time for whatever commodity you're reporting to take those wet bushels and dry it down. So the combine data that we're going to use will take that moisture percentage and then take that factor directly from the lash and dry it down based off of that. So again, it's about those little details. And I can't tell you how many times I would be working a claim as an adjuster, and the production that I had to count for a producer would be, let's say, 100 bushel higher compared to what their net bushels were that they sold to the elevator. And that is the difference. We have to use these kind of standardized formats from crop insurance to make sure that it's consistent. And that's how we've approached acreage reporting and production reporting.
Accuracy in everything we do cannot be understated. And there's a lot done in the ag world that accuracy is not there. And this is another piece of the My Ag data system that just simplifies this so much.
Couldn't agree more. I think the biggest thing that I can take away, or at least hope that people can take away from this call, is that when you standardize the acreage report and applying correct information, kind of standardizing it like I talked about, you're going to be able to optimize every bushel, every acre, every year. And, you've got this precision technology that you've paid for. It's about having it pay for itself, or at least give you a little bit of money back in that investment.
100% correct.
So I think those are kind of my high level pieces of information for you in terms of, kind of taking those paper maps and digitizing it for the 21st century.
Well, it's very intriguing, there's no doubt, and definitely appreciate your time, your information, what you and your company and all your colleagues are doing. Chad, you've been awful quiet on here this morning. Anything to add?
I've been, I've just been enjoying the conversation that you guys have been having and sharing. I think the thing that I'd add is the hardest part of this to me is change. A lot of times it's hard for us to change the way we've been doing something for a long time. And change is inevitable. Sometimes we resist that to a degree. I'd encourage, though, anyone who's listening to this, if they have a little bit of time, during this busy spring, to give us a call to talk about this. We can really help make a difference and ease the way that of the reporting process for you. And with everything that's been said, accuracy of it, I'm not going to say that reporting doesn't get as much as attention as the other jobs that go on through the spring, but sometimes, like Brad alluded to, there's the busyness of our schedule. Sometimes reporting might get neglected if we have a late spring and we're hitting the July 15th deadline and we just need to get the acres reported. We can start those conversations now. So if anyone has time, give us a call, and let's see how we can help.
Definitely. So what is the best way for a grower to get in touch with one of you? Brad, is that your email? Is it phone? Is it calling My Ag Data office directly? What's the best way for folks to get in touch with you?
I think the best way to do it, if you're interested in this, just send us an email and let's get something scheduled and we can talk about your operation. I think that's the best way to approach this, because you might have some questions for us. You might want to kind of talk through some specific examples. Farming is not a catch-all across every single producer. Every producer is a little bit unique in their own farming operation. So if you've got questions, send us an email. Let's talk through those things. Let's see how we can best approach whatever problem is that you've got. So, for instance, my email, bmeyer@myagdata.com. We've got Chad Greenlee. He is the best of the best when it comes to talking with farmers. And his email is cgreenlee@myagdata.com. And you could reach us email, you can call our support line, you can hop on the website and do a little bit of deeper investigation into what we're doing and why we're doing it. But we just want to help people.
We definitely need more of that in this industry. And I will put both Brad and Chad's email in the show notes in the description, so you'll have access to that. The MyAgData website is myagdata.com. Is that correct?
That's correct. You got it.
Excellent. From myself, thanks to the three of you. Any other thoughts, any parting words before we end this show?
No, I think we've covered it all. Appreciate the time.
Yeah,
I'm just
thanks,
excited
Brad.
for planting season, right?
Well, in some cases, it's already here.
Mhm.
In a lot of cases, it's right around the corner. So, which for you folks that do have an opportunity to listen to this, depending on weather here in the very, very short term, if we would happen to catch some of this rain as forecast, we will likely try to do another webinar to get Brad back here on this. But in the meantime, feel free to reach out to Brad, Chad, or go to myagdata.com. And again, thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.